Excellent, thank you. Hi everyone, as Joshua said, I am Liv Erickson. I am the Content Prototyping Engineering Team Lead at High Fidelity. If you didn't get a chance to try out our demo back there, never fear, because we are in open beta on Steam, so you can try it out on your own. And today I'm going to be talking to you about social VR. I know it's a very big surprise given the theme. But my team at High Fidelity spends a lot of time prototyping and looking at the type of content that people are going to start exploring in virtual spaces, and it's open source and it's social, which means there are a lot of specific design considerations that you need to think about right off the bat going into this before you even start writing any kind of code or doing specs. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that this evening. So, say again, hello. I'm super excited to be here. This is my third time in Portland, but the first time that I've been able to be here with the VR community. I'm having an amazing time already, so I hope you all are as well this evening. So I'm going to start by introducing myself just a little bit more. This is my avatar in High Fidelity, so if you're ever popping into the platform, that's me. Take a look. I'd be happy to show you around. If you're not familiar with High Fidelity is an open source client-server architecture for hosting and creating your own content that is inherently social. The entire engine is open source, and you can find us on Twitter, GitHub, and our website here. And the goal is that we want you to own the social spaces that you're building. We are a social species, and we want VR to reflect that, so you can build and develop and host your own worlds using 3D models and JavaScript in World. The engine is built in C++, if that's more your style. And like we said, we think that VR is inherently social because we are inherently social, and community is a very big part of what we do at High Fidelity. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about designing for social VR, specifically focusing on humans, because humans are what makes social VR social. So I'm going to start off with a term that you may or may not have heard before, human in the loop. It's the name of the talk, and it's a model that requires human interaction. And that's not specifically like a 3D model or some kind of art, but it's a closed system or an open system that has a lot of different inputs, but fundamentally it requires human interaction. That's basically every interactive virtual experience. Humans are an input in a 3D immersive space, and every application that has any kind of engagement with the world around you is a human in the loop problem in virtual reality and solutions. So humans in the loop come into play when you're building out a social space. And I kind of made up this definition based off of what Wikipedia said, but it's a model that requires humans interacting with the system and with each other, which is every interactive social virtual reality experience. And humans are unpredictable, just like peppers in the middle of a talk about virtual reality and people. And that's a good thing, because the unpredictability about humans interacting is what creates really interesting experiences that you can't plan for, that have really like human, it's fundamentally the human experience. And you can't try to go into a virtual experience to build up that kind of spontaneity, and you're never going to be able to account for every human action because humans are unpredictable. And so when you're looking at that, when defining and thinking about the type of social content that you want to build in a virtual world, you need to be thinking about not just how an individual user is going to experience the space that you're building and the content that you're building, but also how the community is going to develop its own sense of this like entity of its own being. And you can't really predict that super easily, because there's a lot of variation in what an individual user is going to bring into a virtual space, and then you have to think about the implications of bringing in a lot of humans into a space. If someone is trying virtual reality for the very first time and they put on a headset and they step into a world that is unlike anything that they have ever been in before, and you immediately see a robot standing in front of you, we're now at this place where we don't really know, is that a real person? Can I touch it? Can I talk to it? Can I stand near it? How close can I stand near it? And there are a lot of social norms that we are figuring out even in the physical space today that aren't the same depending on geography or culture or upbringing, and that translates to how a user is going to experience your social world. And within the communities that you build, there are different sets of rules for engaging with each other in a different space at different times, depending on how well you know the other person. If I go to one VR platform, they may have a different set of community rules and regulations than another VR platform, and that's all really challenging for a user to get right off the bat. They're not going to know how to behave. They're not going to know what's going too far if they're engaging with another user. They may not want to. Maybe they're just had a bad day and they don't really feel like talking to too many different people. They just want to hang out with a friend. Maybe they are feeling really outgoing and like they're just going to get up and talk to anybody who will listen to them. And that's going to be different on a day-to-day basis, on a person-to-person basis, and it's going to be different when you're building out these different experiences. So you need to start to evaluate and plan how other users are going to be able to learn about how to engage with each other in a fun way that also encourages those little spontaneous moments that create community and relationships with one another. So you can build out content, even though you can't control your users, to have these kind of social interactions be positive in nature. Since social VR is, by definition, like a multi-user experience in a space, you can't control every input, but you can start to think about how you can control some of those inputs. So what we do at High Fidelity is we have part-time employees who work inside of virtual reality spaces as greeters to help new users get accustomed to the space and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, how the platform works, what's kind of a social expectation in the different spaces that we're hosting, and how they can think about defining their own spaces as they're building out their own domains and hosting users in their spaces. And so that's one mechanic for inputting your own humans into this kind of collective system of humans in the loop development for virtual reality, but it's not the only one. You can imagine having actors playing roles in different experiences if you're building out a multi-user game, but you can think about using human input as a fundamental core mechanic of the social experience that you're building, because that's what your users are going to do with each other. On top of that, that's one element of 3 that I'm kind of highlighting here. You want to create content that's discoverable and it's really easy for users to use. There will be times where maybe a user doesn't want to talk to someone else, but they heard that there's a really cool piece of content in the social world that they want to go explore, and they need to have control over how they're using that experience. And there are some things that may be hard to build into a VR experience that aren't social, and there's some things that will always be social, but there's also a lot of variation in content with how social someone is going to want to be in your space, and you should build content that develops that and kind of encourages a variation of the social element in social VR. And you also, again, like I said, you want to facilitate unstructured collaboration, because if you put a human in a box, that's the second they're going to try to get out of it. You can't dictate to a set of users, you need to go do this first, and then this, and then that, and expect them to all be in the same space and get along with that and listen to you. They're going to try to get out of that box. Hi, Desmond. So you need to expect the unexpected here. So you start when you're developing a social experience to think about what are your goals with what you're trying to build. The current thing that my team at High Fidelity is working on is the experience of building an avatar shopping world. And the goals of this are, we want to build a place where people can customize their avatars through social shopping. And then we need to understand kind of why are we building this and what is the functionality that we want to be providing through this social experience, and why is it social? One, it's social inherently because we think people want to be spending time together and developing these relationships. They're coming into a social VR platform, presumably because they know that means there's going to be other people that they could be exploring these worlds with. We're looking for those in-groups and those communities of people who are experiencing the same things that we are and are interested in the same things and having those shared experiences and bonds together. So in the context of the avatar store, for us, this is, let's understand how people develop their identities and give them an opportunity to develop their own identity in a social VR world, and give them the opportunity to do that with other people, because you'll explore identity not just as an individual, but for a community that's growing in that experience as well. Then think about how this experience is going to motivate and drive an individual user of your space. Well, I like hanging out in High Fidelity because I know a lot of the users there, and I have friends there, and I like to hang out with them because they're on the other side of the planet and they live in Europe, or I've only met them online and we have these fun experiences together. So I'm motivated to go into social worlds because I'm able to meet people with those shared interests and do ridiculous stuff together, like get shot up into space on rockets, which I haven't done in the physical world as much as I'd really like to ask NASA to do that. And so knowing what an individual user is going to look for in an experience leads you to understand what the model is around how other human inputs in your social VR system could fundamentally and will fundamentally impact the overall experience of an individual user. So when thinking about human inputs, like I said, humans are unpredictable. You can't possibly come up with a system that's going to handle every single possible human interaction together. They're going to throw curveballs, and some people are going to use the opportunity to develop relationships with people, and they're going to be really excited, and they're going to be really friendly, and they're going to form really good bonds, and they're going to behave, but other people are not. And that's another input that you need to be designing for and thinking about when you're building these spaces, even before you're building the content, and thinking about from a technical perspective how you want to build that, because they will have opportunities, and you will find people will use social VR for evil. So part of that is then, commanding the content and understanding the restrictions and the limitations of the system that you're building in, or what it's facilitating and enabling. In the case of High Fidelity, I often have a really hard time when people ask me, well, what can I build? Because truthfully, you can build kind of whatever you want, and it's given to you as a domain operator or a content creator. It's up to you to decide how free you want your space to be, or how locked down and defined you want it to be. But understanding that in social VR, if a user can grab something in your space, they can and they will use that to hurt someone else's experience. So you have to design for these potential malicious use cases from the beginning, and you have to get creative with physics, because physics are one of the most fun parts about VR and seeing how things act in a virtual space. But it's also really an important area to kind of figure out where you make trade-offs between believability and protection in a virtual space, especially when you have a lot of multi-user content and an undefined set of rules around how those users should interact with each other. So when you're building your content, you also have to be building and thinking about the protections for those user connections and fail-safes. So there's one level of that at the protection level of giving users tools to have control over whether or not users can talk to them, giving them the ability to mute and block, or provide a safety radius in the form of some kind of like protective bubble around them. But it's also thinking about how building a specific set of content could be used to either have a good experience or a bad experience, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I go into the specifics of shopping in the Avatar store. So you can use all of this information to think about how you'll build experiences that encourage collaborations. So you want to encourage users to experiment, because that's what is fundamentally going to form those human bonds. And it's what's going to create the community that makes your social VR experience appealing. You go back to social VR because of the people that are in there, not because of one particular thing that you like to do in isolation. So you want to think about architecting solutions that amplify positive social interactivity. Something that came up that was sort of surprising with the Avatar store is the idea of just figuring out how to translate the motion of putting a hat on. We do a lot of that tactile. We put it on our heads and we're like, okay, great, I have a hat on. But we can't see the back of our head in VR because of the way the headset's tracking. And you can provide people an opportunity to develop their sense of style with other people by letting them adjust your hat for you, or scaling it or switching into third-person view, depending on what it is that that user feels like doing that day and how social they feel like being. And that's, again, going to vary whether or not the person trying to attach the hat to their head is a stranger or a friend, and just their own experiences that day. And because you can't manufacture spontaneity, you can encourage it. So you want to think about this balance and this trade-off when you're developing content of how do I provide a experience that provides enough flexibility that people can really express themselves and they can enjoy this content, but they're not going to have like completely free reign over everything that they're making. So what we do in the avatar store as an example of this is you're limited to what joint on your avatar you can attach an object to, but that doesn't stop people from coming up with really creative ways to scale and rotate and flip things upside down and use them in totally different ways to create new experiences that we weren't predicting. And as part of this, again, you have to design for anti-harassment. And if I'm being totally honest, it's a little bit fun when you do this because you get to design and be the bad guy in an experience to make sure that other people don't do that. And so giving people the freedom to manipulate VR spaces, which is one of the really appealing things about VR, gives them tools to harm each other. So again, you want to give users these flexible tools. You want to test often, and I don't like using the word aggressively in a lot of scenarios, but in this case, you want to test aggressively because your users there will be bad users who come in just looking to ruin someone else's day. So you can't always come up with technological solutions to fix some of these things too. In the context of someone, taking off a hat that I've tried on, if I'm like, oh, I don't like this, but my hand controller is broken, can you take it off my head? That's something that's positive intent, but a malicious user can come and pull that off. And from a technical perspective, there's nothing that we as developers can do that will make that go from a positive experience to a negative one, and that's that human in the loop input. And then lastly, when designing for a lot of these experiences, you really want to consider that your user it might be their first time they've ever been in this VR space, much less a social VR space. And so you have to build out tools that support that understanding that they may not have ever used hand controllers before. This could be the first app that they picked out of their once getting a VR headset, and your tools need to reflect that level of ease for use. And so I have seen some really amazing talks, and I'm not going to try to cover everything that you should do when you're building safety for social VR, but this is a really good talk from Oculus Connect 4 about building safety into social VR experiences, and there's some other really good talks on YouTube. They go into a lot of the different types of malicious users that you can find and how you can build protections around that. So social shopping and high fidelity. I mentioned we want to provide flexibility for what users can use and what they can do to kind of explore identity and expression here. So Jasmine helped me get this little Halloween costume together, and you can tell that I'm actually wearing the same hat on my head 3 different ways. This beanie here is a monster beanie, and if we defined, you only have the ability to put this where we say you can, this would not have been fun. This wouldn't have been silly. This wouldn't have provided an opportunity for us to be goofing off around Halloween and coming up with costumes in virtual reality. So what we ended up doing here is all of those hats are still attached to the head joint, but they're just rotated, and we've given users the flexibility to scale things and rotate them to come up with ridiculous monsters like this. And as part of that, there's a lot of different things that can, again, also be used in negative ways. If you give users the ability to scale something, there you already are saying, what's stopping a user from moving it really large? So you have to build in protections around scale restrictions. And so there's a lot of different stuff that isn't like a one-size-fits-all solution for creating multi-user content, which is why this is challenging, but it's also super important. So I wrote up a blog post specifically about the technical implementations on how we built the avatar shopping experience in high fidelity, which you can go up to this very easily memorizable link and check out later. I'll post all of these online when I'm done, so you can go back through and take a look at them. But we talk a lot about how designing for social, you design for the experience that users are going to want to help each other, but they're also going to want to have a lot of negative experiences too if you're not designing on ways to prevent that. And I go into how we kind of, with that knowledge, built the avatar store using high fidelity, but a lot of these principles apply to any kind of social experience or social game that you're going to build. So again, kind of just recapping, we are spending a lot of time looking at ways to give an individual user tools to protect themselves in a social VR experience against malicious actors. And there are community guidelines that are pretty well established from other MMOs and online worlds and social worlds. But when you're thinking about, fundamentally, your experience has humans in the loop, you need to be testing, you need to be researching, you need to be experimenting. We put almost everybody in our company into the avatar shopping experience to test it, and we saw some really funny results that we never would have anticipated. Some of those influence design decisions and impact things we don't think about with the product. Like, if you use a very small-sized avatar, a traditional store isn't going to work for you, and you need to build in different things that will support various types of identities that people may have in these experiences. We need to build in protection for taking stuff out of the store, because some of the users decided they wanted to try to set up a fake store outside and just took all the stuff out with them. So we wanted to lock in that content in the store, because that's something that we didn't want to have as an experience, and that wouldn't be good for content creators who are trying to build their own stores and creating spaces. We don't want people to just be able to take them away, so we have to start thinking about, well, what's the equivalent of having like a store alarm go off in VR if someone's trying to steal stuff. And in VR it's nice because you can actually just make the things disappear. So, and the funny part about all of that is that we saw that after the fact, because one of the other users had decided to set up their role, like take on the role of like a security guard, and was like taking pictures of people who were trying to go out of the store with stuff that they hadn't paid for. And so you get a lot of these different experiences about ways that you're not going to anticipate users will be building things. But at the same time, you end up with these really serendipitous, spontaneous, silly moments that are what make the community in a social VR experience so engaging, so awesome to hang out with. I mean, if you can't tell, I love the people that I work with and the community at High Fidelity because of the people that are in there every day and how they're helping each other. And you can't fake that or prescribe that, and that's why it's really important to be thinking from day one that humans are a very, very important input, even if they are super unpredictable. So I want to say thank you so much again for having me. Again, you can reach me here. Feel free to send me an email, Twitter, and talk to Jasmine if you want to sign up for information about our upcoming beta for commerce and access to the avatar store so you can make your own creativity come to life with your identity in social VR.